Welcome. This is the interview we have today on behalf of EFSAS with Mr. Afrasiab Khattak. He's joining us from Islamabad, Pakistan. Afrasiab Khattak has been a politician. Currently, I believe he has, in a country like Pakistan, he has no political ambitions anymore, but he has been a politician. He has been a senator in Pakistan. Apart from that, he has been the chair of the Pakistan Human Rights Commission. And he is also, of course, a human rights activist, but a lesser known side of his is that he is also a poet. So Afrasiab Khattak Sahab, thank you and welcome for at this interview with EFSAS.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And so, like I said to you before we started as well, is that while of course we are going to discuss contemporary issues, you're an expert on Afghan identity, politics in Afghanistan, politics in Pakistan, the Pashtun identity, the Taliban, the Pakistani military establishment. This all you are known to be one of the foremost experts on this issue. But before we come there, of what is happening today in the region, from your perspective, and not only from your perspective in how you view politics of the region, but also from your personal perspective, how did we come here? Because you have known, you have struggled for decades for democracy in Pakistan. You have a personal connection to Afghanistan and to the Afghan and Pashtun identity. So before we come to what is happening today, we would actually like to know a little bit more about you as a politician, as an activist, as a writer, as a poet. And from that perspective, maybe try to make sense of things that are happening now. So if you can explain a bit about your struggle, what you did, how you started, and how we ended up here.
Thank you very much. Actually, I got politicized in 1968 in the great people's uprising against General Ayub Khan's martial law, General Ayub Khan's dictatorship. That was a time when there was youth uprisings in different countries, and particularly people with leftist ideas were emerging at the scene. So I joined Pashtun Students Federation in 1968 during that uprising. And after that, I supported National Awami Party, NAP, the foremost leftist and democratic party in Pakistan. In 1950s, it came into being in 1950s. 1954, it was National Party. In 1957, it became National Awami Party.
This was the party of Khan Abdul Wali Khan.
Party of Khan Abdul Wali Khan, led by Khan Abdul Wali Khan. So we supported that party in 1970 elections that were held under General Yahya Khan's martial law. Then came 1971 crisis. We supported the struggle of the people of Bangladesh. We opposed military action against the people of East Bengal, and we demonstrated, we raised our voice. Our party was banned by General Yahya Khan. Then Mr. Bhutto came in power in January 1972, and he lifted ban from our party. Our party got into a coalition government in two provinces of the country, Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. But it could last only 10 months because there were pressures on Mr. Bhutto's government from the king of Iran, Raza Shah, and other pressures. So he dissolved our government unconstitutionally. And we went to agitate against this decision. Our government in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa resigned in protest. And we went into prolonged agitation. And then I was a student activist, but I went to prison. I was arrested more than once under Mr. Bhutto, sometimes for 6 months, sometimes for 8 months. But ultimately, in 1975, Mr. Bhutto banned our party, and we were put on trial. We were arraigned before a special tribunal for high treason. 55 leaders of National Army Party were arraigned before a special tribunal. I was one of the accused persons, along with Khan Abdul Wali Khan, Ataullah Mangal, Khair Bakhsh Mari, Ghaus Bakhsh Bizinjo, Gul Khan Nasir, and many others. It was close to 2 years that we were arraigned before that tribunal, and Ziaul Haq overthrew Mr. Bhutto, and we were released by General Ziaul Haq in the hope that we will keep on opposing Mr. Bhutto. But we, of course, had no personal problem with Mr. Bhutto. So we opposed martial law of General Ziaul Haq. So I was arrested again, and for almost 3 years I was in prison under Ziaul Haq. In 1980, when I was released in Balochistan from a prison, notorious prison, Much prison, Much, I was told by a civil bureaucrat that I was under threat and I should either quit politics or quit the country, or at least quit the country for the time when there is martial law. So I decided to go to Afghanistan because that was the only country where we could go without passport. I mean, just crossing the federally administered tribal area by foot, we could enter Afghanistan. And I knew these Afghan leaders of People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. We were good friends. In 1970s, I particularly knew Dr. Najibullah, the late president of Afghanistan, and many others in that party. So I went to Kabul in the hope that Ziaul Haq will hold elections and I'll come back after 3-4 months. But then elections were not held. For 8.5 years, I had to stay put in Kabul. And there were many Pakistanis, People's Party leaders, Benazir Bhutto's brothers, Murtaza and Shah Nawaz were there. Khair Bakhsh Mari came to Kabul along with 15,000 Baloch followers. Ajmal Khattak was already there. And so we had a good number of Pakistanis opposed to Ziaul Haq's martial law. When Benazir Bhutto came in power in 1988, she declared that the exiles can come back. So I, along with some other Pashtun exile leaders, we came back to Pakistan. We rejoined ANP, Awami National Party. It was a new party, a continuation of the old party, but under a new name. So I joined that. And after that, I also joined the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan. But in Pakistan, we faced a democracy which was controlled by generals. It is a hybrid system after that. So the civilian governments could not really complete their term, and there were struggles for democracy. And I was part of struggle for human rights, democracy in Pakistan, and peace with India. I also joined Pakistan India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy, and remained its president of its Pakistani chapter for many years. So this was most of the activities that I was busy in.
And you talk about your struggle for democracy, and you were also part of the. You were actually at the end. You became chairman of the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan. Any incidents or cases on which still are in your mind, on which you worked during that time? Yes.
Actually, I was invited to join this organization by Miss Asma Jahangir. Mm-hmm. We became very good friends, very close friends, and I worked with her, and we faced difficult challenges. I remember Nawab Akbar Bukti, when before his death, Asma Jahangir and myself, we went in a delegation for fact-finding in Bukti area of Balochistan. In the evening, when we were entering Balochistan, our car was fired upon. And I mean, the effort was to send us back, but we refused to go back. We spent the night near the road, And the next morning, we went to the area. Akbar Bukti was not at his home. He had fled his home to a far-flung place, and he invited us to visit him there. And both of us went to see him. It was a few days before his death, before he was killed by army in a military operation. So we met him under difficult conditions. But you see, there were many other things. And when I became senator in 2009, March 2009, I became chairperson of the Senate's Committee on the Human Rights. And then I tackled very serious issues as chairperson of the Senate Human Rights Committee. And in 2013, 2014, we worked on a law we proposed to the Senate that there should be a law for the ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, because we thought it was involved in this enforced disappearances in the country. Of course, we were able to pass the recommendation by the Senate, but the law did not come into being. It was never framed because ISI put pressure on political parties and they did not do it. So there were certain things in human rights area in Pakistan that are still unresolved.
So how you talked about two cases, which was one meeting Nawab Akbar Bukti before he died, and he died afterwards. Then you talked about a law which would which would hold the ISI accountable in some ways. Those are, of course, cases you're saying which could not materialize. Do you also remember a few cases where you did meet success?
Yes, of course. I worked very hard for Afghan refugees in Pakistan. They were, you see, Pakistan is not signatory to international conventions on refugees, and Pakistan doesn't have any law internally also. So these refugees were used in this political engineering in Afghanistan. When Pakistan doesn't have good relations with the government in Afghanistan, they push these refugees back. Or sometimes, for example, when Taliban come into power, they push refugees to go to show that there is normalcy in Afghanistan. So they deal it on political basis. There's a book, very interesting book, and I think it's available. There's a soft copy on the internet, From Mahajir to Mujahid. Mahajir in our languages is refugee, and Mujahid is holy warrior. So how these refugees were turned into holy warriors. This book describes it. It is written by Professor Fazal Rahim Marwat, and I have written the foreword of that book. So we have discussed in detail this refugee problem. This was also, so I was able at times to at least reduce pressure on refugees. Under Musharraf, for example, I remember under Musharraf, there was a lot of pressure on them. They were thrown across the border by police. They were taken in cars and lorries without their consent. But we protested, and we were able to prevail on the government to stop that practice.
And you also, perhaps not many people know, you were also married in Kabul, in Afghanistan?
Yes, yes. Actually, when our stay prolonged, I was not alone in marrying in Afghanistan. Actually, it was started by Benazir's brothers, Murtaza and Shah Nawaz. The two of them, two brothers, they married two sisters, Fauzia and Rehana. And I participated in their marriage. It was very limited because they were they had security problems. So there were 3 Pakistanis, and I was one of them. We spent the night together in their marriage. And after some time, I also married in Afghanistan. My wife is from eastern part of Afghanistan, from Kunar province of Afghanistan, yes.
And like you said, it's very sometimes puzzling. Of course, you started off with your political career, and then you also became an activist, a human rights activist. Where does the poet come in?
Well, it was from very childhood. My grandfather from mother's side was a literary person. He was a good friend of poet Iqbal, a very close friend. And he knew Persian also. And he was the one who gave me this name, Afrasiab. It is from the famous epic, Persian epic Shahnama, the story of the kings by Firdausi. My grandfather used to recite poetry, and before I went to school, I was very, very small. I mean, as kid, I remembered poetry, but without understanding the meaning. So this is how it started. And Pashto was my mother tongue. Pashto is my mother tongue. But of course, I learned Urdu in school and college. And then I learned English. Persian, I was always interested in. I learned some Persian in school, but speaking and reading and writing, I picked up in Kabul during my stay there for 8.5 years. Because in 1975, I remember when I visited Kabul for 2.5 months, a brief visit. At the end of my visit, I was invited for a meeting by President Muhammad Dawood Khan. He was president at that time. He couldn't speak Pashto. It was very ironic because he was very famous for supporting the Pashtun cause. But he said that before we started our conversation, he said he will slowly speak in Persian and we should speak slowly in Pashto. At that time, I couldn't speak Persian. Of course, I understood, but I couldn't speak. But during my stay in Kabul, then I picked up Persian. Now I can speak, read, and write Persian also.
And how much of this poet was influenced by your time in jail with people like Habib Jalib, Faiz Ahmed Faiz, and other poets of Pakistan, great poets in Pakistan?
Yes. Actually, even this Pashtun nationalist movement was full of poets. Ajmal Khattak, who was my mentor and like my teacher, he was also a very outstanding Pashto poet. Ghani Khan was, of course, my guru, Abdul Ghaffar Khan's eldest son, who studied in Shantiniketan, Tagore's school in Calcutta. He had also studied in United Kingdom, UK, and United States, but after his return from US in 1933 or 34, he went to Delhi because his father was in prison. Their property was confiscated by British colonial rulers. So he had no money and nothing. So he stayed with Nehru's. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru put him along with Indira Gandhi in Shantiniketan. So when he came, he was a great scholar, a man of encyclopedic knowledge. Over the years, I always learned from him. And he was also a great poet, one of great Pashto poets. But then in movement in Pakistan, I met Habib Jalib, Shair-e Awam, people's poet. His poetry is famous for resistance. Even in these days, I mean, the last few years, he has become very popular in India also. His poems are recited by agitations by Indian youth. But Faiz Ahmed Faiz, of course, I knew him. I had the honor of knowing him. In prison, we had Gul Khan Nasir, the most outstanding Baloch poet of Balochi language. He is so far the most outstanding. So we had, I was in good company, and I could read poetry, I could recite poetry. We had poetry recitation sessions. So it was a very conducive atmosphere.
Okay, no, that it's very interesting to hear these these connections, of course, of the leftist people in Pakistan, and then poets who joined, of course, the leftist movement or vice versa. You also talked about you being the chairperson of an institution which was working for better or friendly relations with India. Why do you think? Because why do you think Pakistan should have friendly relations with India? What do you think?
Yes, you see, many of us were of the view that as long as we have hostile relations with India, it's very difficult to establish democracy in Pakistan, because this anti-Indianism is part of the militaristic ideology which has imposed authoritarianism in Pakistan for long years. Every martial law that comes in Pakistan, imposed in Pakistan, has the slogan of fighting with India. So we thought that by normalizing relations with India, we will be able to produce an atmosphere, shape an atmosphere, which will be more conducive for democratic dispensation in Pakistan. The same is true of our relation with Afghanistan. So I think peace and democracy in Pakistan are two sides of the same coin.
So you believe that friendly relations with India are first and foremost in the interest of Pakistan itself?
Yes, of course. I'm very confident. I believe that, you see, Pakistan's major problem has been its expenditure on the army. You see, during partition, Pakistan got smaller part of the resources of Indian subcontinent, but it got more than 30% of the army, which was too big for Pakistan. And this has been a great problem for Pakistan, this non-productive expenditure. It has, you see, arrested Pakistan's economic development, social development, and political development. So we believe that for Pakistan to come to geo-economic and grow out of geostrategic is very important for democratization of Pakistani state and society. And the militarization has given birth to so many problems. The militancy that you see around, this religious extremism, these are the product of unbridled militarization over the years.
And very interesting, you note that during partition, of course, Pakistan got a certain percentage of land, and I believe it was 33% of the army which they got, which was too big for the country. But why do you think that the army, apart from anti-Indianism, as you call it, why do you think the army succeeded in, as some would call it, that every country has an army and the Pakistani army has a country? Why do you think it succeeded for, now it's been 75 years and it's still very firmly sitting in its saddle? How come that they succeeded for so many years and are still succeeding in holding this country hostage to their institutional interests?
Actually, in Pakistan, the state that we got from colonial rulers, bureaucracy was the older part, more mature part of the state system. It was far older than, for example, elected institutions. Parliament came very late. Assemblies, provincial assemblies came only in mid-1930s. But this army and civil bureaucracy were the older part of the state system. Then this was part of Indian subcontinent, which was socially backward, socioeconomic terms, it was backward. Feudalism. So the landed gentry and this colonial bureaucracy, they formed an unholy alliance against people's power, against people's rule. So that also was a factor. But as long as we had Bengalis, our Bengali friends and comrades, they were very strong contingent of democracy. So the resistance against this authoritarianism was quite strong. After the freedom of Bangladesh, of course, things changed. A balance of forces changed. Mr. Bhutto was the most outstanding leader with a popular base in the country. He was executed to send a lesson to civilian rulers or civilian leaders that they can't rule only by people's support. I mean, they have to look towards establishment and the military establishment in particular to accommodate their interests. So this is how the hybrid system started from Ziaul Haq. And I think this has also shaped our Afghan policy. Pakistan's Afghan policy is the product of this military mindset.
And you talk about Ziaul Haq. Do you think that the rapid Islamization of Pakistan started with Ziaul Haq, or was it there already earlier?
You see, first of all, Ziaul Haq was not alone in this. In military, there was a group which really thought that Bengal, according to them, seceded because it was not properly Islamized. So this, I mean, this was the wrong lesson that they learned from the independence of Bangladesh. Instead of saying that because Pakistan was not able to implement federal democratic system, which could have empowered Bengali people and included them in Pakistani state and society so that they would have been part of the country. But they on the other hand, they thought because they were not properly Islamized. This was, so Ziaul Haq was not alone in this. This was first. Secondly, you see, for martial law and for abrogation of the 1973 constitution, Islam came very handy, this religious slogan, to exploit the religious feelings of the people of Pakistan and to justify military dictatorship. This despotism was justified by in the name of Islam. And you see, Ziaul Haq, the referendum that Ziaul Haq held for his presidency, the question was, do you believe that Islam should be the main principle of power or state in Pakistan? This was the question. If you say yes, then you are voting for Ziaul Haq. You see, this was how the, and you see the other things, the parliamentary system was distorted into a presidential system. The federal system was deformed into a unitary system in the name of Islam. So you see, it was part of political engineering. But I think a very important aspect of this militarization is Pakistan's Afghan policy. This is not really very well known because it is not very widely discussed. You see, Mr. Bhutto wrote, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto wrote his last book in Rawalpindi jail before his execution in April 1979. He wrote this book. He used to write on loose papers, pretending that he was writing a statement for the court. But his lawyer, Yahya Bakhtiar, Mr. Yahya Bakhtiar, would smuggle it out and would put it with himself. And it was first published in India. The title of the book was If I Am Assassinated.
Yeah.
But now it's available in Pakistan and not only in English. Bhutto wrote it in English, but it's available in other languages also. Mr. Bhutto in that book says that when he was foreign minister with General Ayub Khan in 1960s, whenever they would meet Germans, Ayub Khan would say, our common traditions, our common values. Mr. Bhutto would be surprised. He was Sindhi, and Sindhis are not very widely represented in the armed forces, neither in pre-partition India nor in Pakistan as an independent country. They are not. So he was surprised. But then on one occasion, Ayub Khan was more explicit. He said, we are martial races. And Mr. Bhutto immediately got the point. He was a very intelligent man, a very well-educated person. So he was reminded of Prussia, the state before Germany. He says Prussia had built a big army for Napoleonic wars. But once those wars were over, the Prussians did not know what to do with this big army. He says they had three options. The first option was to expand the country so that a big country could afford a big army. The second option was to reduce the strength of the army so that it is affordable and according to the, in proportion with the resources of the country. And the third was to keep the status quo and let the country crumble under the burden of a big army. He says the Prussians went ultimately for the first option. In 1871, under Bismarck, they expanded and created Germany. Their problem was resolved. Bhutto says we have a similar problem at our hands. But unfortunately, he says 100 years after Bismarck, in 1971, our country got disintegrated. We lost half of the country. So our problem aggravated further. It was always there, but it aggravated further. So he says, let's examine these Prussian options for Pakistan. Expansion of the country. Mr. Bhutto says this is not doable. This is not age for expansion, and particularly for the country of the size and resources of Pakistan, and with the fresh country, new country, without a long history or identity, it is not possible. So he says the second option, reducing the strength of the army, Bhutto says anybody who will insist on this will be hanged. So this is also not doable, not practical. So he concludes that Pakistan is condemned to have this third option, to keep the status quo and let the country crumble under the burden of a big army. This is what Mr. Bhutto wrote in spring 1979 before he was executed. After him, had he been, after his death, there were so many developments that would have been surprising for Mr. Bhutto if he had been alive, because his generals actually went for the first option, expansion. Okay, yeah. And this strategic depth in Afghanistan is actually a policy of expansion. It is an euphemism to describe expansion in a diplomatic way. So Pakistan, it's a very important project for Pakistan. It is as important for Pakistani military as the nuclear project was, not less than that. So that's why after Ziaul Haq, in the last 4 decades, many things have changed, but this policy has not changed. Actually, Pakistani army or its intelligence agencies is the most determined player in this Afghan conflict to implement this policy. So they first launched Afghan Mujahideen. They were sent, a government was made in Pakistan. The government went to Afghanistan, it failed to take off. And there was anarchy. Warlords started fighting against each other. And Taliban came into being. And I wouldn't say that Pakistani intelligence sat and created this group, but this I know that Pakistani intelligence pounced at them immediately and adopted them. Before that, Pakistan used to patronize Gulbuddin Hikmatyar's Hizb-e-Islami. But during the civil war in Afghanistan, Pakistan gave up on Gulbuddin Hikmatyar's Hizb-e-Islami and adopted Taliban. After that, Pakistan and Taliban worked together. But you see, Taliban project is a very systematic thing. It's not just a military machine. It is mainly a military machine. There is no doubt about that. A very strong military machine, very well experienced in war of attrition. But apart from that, it is also a war on identity. Because you see, these young people, they are from Afghan refugee families in Pakistan, who are...
You mean?
Yes, who are living in Pakistan for the last 40 years. You see, absolute majority of these young people are trained in religious seminaries in Pakistan. According to official figure, there are 36,000 religious seminaries.
In Pakistan?
In Pakistan, but some people say they can be like 50,000. And most of them were created for this Afghan jihad. And they have this Middle Eastern extremist ideologies, Wahhabism, Salafism, and Takfirism. Takfirism is to challenge even the Muslimhood of the Muslims, saying that they are not good Muslims and they can be killed for that.
Yeah.
So you see these ideologies, so young people are brainwashed in these religious seminaries, and these Afghan boys are brainwashed. So you see, in a way, Pakistani generals, along with some religious party, Jamaat Islami was their close ally, and this Muslim Brotherhood from the Middle East. They also worked with Pakistani army in this Afghan jihad. So you see, they tempered with Afghan identity.
Okay, one second, just to get you, I understand you, but just for the viewers as well, because what you are saying, just to clarify that, is that the Afghan refugees who were in refugee camps in mostly Peshawar, but in Pakistan, that the Pakistani army recruited them and enrolled them in the thousands of madrasas in Pakistan in order to brainwash them with Wahhabi ideology.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. I mean, Wahhabi, Deobandi, and other extremist ideologies. And the book that I mentioned give details of this process, this from Mahajir to Mujahid. You see, but just to clarify, Pakistan was not alone in this. For example, US also initially supported this project. Nebraska University created a syllabus curriculum for Afghan refugee schools, and it was very militant curriculum. Even in a math question, it would go like 4 Kalashnikov plus 5 Kalashnikov is equal to 9 Kalashnikov.
There was a question like, if you fire a bullet from this distance with a Kalashnikov, how many seconds will it take?
Yes. So these things. So US also was part of this. Then the Arab countries also supported this project. Dollar or petrodollar went together into this project, and that's why this huge network of religious seminaries could work. Even it's working even now. You see, in Pakistan has promised many times to reform it, but they have not. Because had they reformed it, I mean, Taliban would not have occupied Kabul this time around. So I was coming to the identity question, which is very important. You see, Afghans have converted to Islam 1,000 years ago under Mahmud of Ghazna's invasion of this region. Before that, people were Hindus. Before that, they were Buddhists. At some stage, they might have been Zoroastrians. But Mahmud of Ghazna invasion converted them into Islam, and majority of the people here have been Muslims. So Afghan Muslims identity, or Pashtun Muslim has been the identity. Now these guys, Pakistani generals and these religious extremists, they worked on this identity and they exaggerated this Muslim part of the identity, not for the love of Islam, but to weaken the Afghan part or the Pashtun part.
You call it in your articles, you call it, this was done to deconstruct Afghan identity.
Exactly. And I'll explain, I mean, as to how was it practiced. But this is how they started. Theoretically, I mean, they tempered with this identity definition, and the Afghan part was weakened by exaggeration of the religious part of the identity. So when Taliban entered Kabul in September 1996, what were the 6 or 7 major steps that they took after taking over Kabul? The first thing, they changed the name of Radio Kabul. It became Voice of Sharia. Now, Islamabad radio is not Voice of Sharia. Radio Tehran is also not Voice of Sharia. Even Saudi radio is not Voice of Sharia. But Radio Kabul became Voice of Sharia. Afghan national anthem was banned. Afghan national flag was banned. Nowruz, 5,000 years old festival, which is celebrated throughout Central Asia and Iran and Afghanistan, it was banned. Jirga, the most important Pashtun social institutions, Jirga. I mean, you can't think of Pashtun identity without Jirga. But they said, no, in Islam, there is no, in Sharia, you can't have Jirgas. They murdered Dr. Najibullah, the Afghan president who was prepared for peace and had worked very hard for peace and had resigned for peace and had, you see, very consistently worked on politics of national reconciliation and peace for Afghanistan. But he was a very brave, energetic, outstanding Afghan leader. He was killed. Similarly, Buddha statue in Bamiyan was demolished. You see, nobody was worshipping Buddha statue. It was a national monument representing Gandhara civilization. But you see, everything that represented Afghanhood was attacked. It was not a coincidence. They were programmed for it. They had software in them for doing this. And you see, this time around again, you see, they're very consistent with this. They went to Kabul this time round. They banned this flag, Afghan national flag. Those who carry this flag are attacked. You see, well, is it an enemy flag? It represents Afghan identity. And then you see, recently they have renamed their military corps. It's very ironic that Pakistan Army named their missiles after Hori and Abdali Afghan heroes. Yeah. But Afghans, you see, changed the name of their military garrisons and they Arabized them. The basic purpose is to de-Afghanize, to deconstruct Afghan identity, and for Pakistan to transform Afghanistan into an appendage, into sort of area which is administered by Pakistan. It is important to deconstruct this identity. And I must say that in the 90s, the same policy under Ziaul Haq, not Ziaul Haq, he died in 1988, but the followers of Ziaul Haq extended the same policy to Kashmir.
Yeah, I was actually coming there, a little bit moving from Afghanistan, that it sounds very familiar what you're saying, because of the reasons that Kashmir, for example, or especially the Kashmir Valley, the majority of the people became Muslim there 500 years ago. And I'm actually reminded of a saying of Emperor Jahangir, the Mughal emperor who visited Kashmir during his reign. And he basically said that, I do not understand what kind of Muslims live in Kashmir. There appears to be no difference between them and the Kashmiri Hindus, to the extent that they celebrate each other's feasts together or each other's festivals together. And so you link this deconstructing of identity, because in Kashmir also we heard slogans in the 90s that you're first a Muslim, this is an Islamic caliphate. At that time they used to say Nizam-e-Mustafa, the rule of the Prophet. So you see this being carried forward into Kashmir as well. And, yes. and that is where you make the link that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto might be yes. surprised that the yes. army went for the first option, which is expansion.
Exactly. I mean, Kashmir is the other dimension of the strategic depth. Okay. You see, it is like you see, like in Germany, they used to speak of Lebensraum, space for living. You see, countries have been doing this. People have been doing this to justify expansion.
So, in Kashmir, they have been busy with it for 30 years. And in Afghanistan, they have been busy for much longer. And, yes. You talk about, and this is not for our understanding, but just for the viewers' understanding, because this is a term, of course, used in academics and in research and in politics a lot. You and other analysts keep talking about strategic depth, which of the Pakistani military establishment, of the deep state, of the intelligence agencies. What do you mean by the strategic depth? What does this strategic depth mean?
You see, the strategic depth is actually to hegemonize Afghanistan, and for all practical purposes, like the Britishers at some time in late 19th century, the Britishers not only divided Afghanistan and pulled part of Afghanistan out of it and put it into Indian subcontinent, but they also controlled the foreign policy and security policy of Afghanistan. And you see, our bureaucracy that we have inherited from British period is very keen on these things. So they sort of protectorate, Afghanistan becoming Pakistan's protectorate, an appendage. This tribal area in Pakistan expanding to, let's say, deep into Afghanistan. So this has been, for all practical purposes, the purpose of this strategic depth. Although they have been denying this in recent years, they say, no, not anymore. We don't pursue this policy. But you see, Taliban is an instrument of this policy. Taliban is the most important instrument of this policy.
And you say, you've written this, you say that Taliban is Pakistani military establishment's project, where you say, where you again talk about the Pashtun identity. Where do you see this project of the Pakistani military establishment going today, as of today? And where do you see Pashtun identity in this conundrum?
You see, I say this because in recent years, when I was heading the major Pashtun party in Pakistan, I was its provincial head. I was heading its provincial chapter for 6 years. You see, more than 800 of our activists were killed by Taliban. This party is a non-violent party. It doesn't believe in violence.
The ANP.
ANP,
yeah,
Awami National Party. I headed it in Pashtunkhwa province for 6 years. When it was in power, it was ruling the province. We were attacked. I survived a suicide attack. Many of our comrades died, our assembly members, parliamentarians, activists. So you see, why would Taliban attack people on this side of the border? You see, basically, Taliban project is aimed to sort of project Pashtuns as tribal warriors and not political people, so let the world give Pakistan Army the role to sort of manage them, etc. But you see, this is a bad policy for Pakistan. This is a suicidal policy. Ultimately, it is bad for Pakistan because it has militarized Pakistan to an extent where Pakistan is finding it very difficult to compete in terms of economic development in the region and in the world. And the present economic crisis that we see is mostly because of this policy of militarization. And this militarization also bred, you see, different types of religious militancies. Recently, the one that marched in Islamabad this month, during this very month, TLP. So you see, different brands have mushroomed in Pakistan, and most of them also can be connected with these religious seminaries, which Pakistani state has refused to reform or control or sort of reform them to an extent. I mean, no one is opposed to education of religion. I mean, in every country is part of the syllabus, and it should be taught here. We have no problem with that. But you see, just to brainwash students into suicide bombers is really objectionable. That's something that is bad for Pakistan. Pakistan has great potential for economic development. It could have become a regional economic power had it sort of recognized Afghanistan as an independent neighborly country. Pakistan could have reached Central Asian market through Afghanistan. And it could have, you see, strengthened Pakistan economically. But unfortunately, this policy of Talibanization or Taliban project has hindered Pakistan's efforts. You see, let me just give you a very interesting example. 3 of Afghan neighbors from the north and west have built rail tracks with Afghanistan in the last few years. You see, the Uzbek train from Uzbekistan enters Mazar Sharif city. It's a functioning railway system. Mm-hmm. Iranian railway has recently reached Herat province. Iranian railway. Railway from Turkmenistan has reached Afghan border. But you see, Pakistan has not built even 10 meters of railway. Pakistan, you see, there's a road between Khyber Pass, between Peshawar and Turkham, through the Khyber Pass. It's 40 miles. In 1992, Pakistan declared, when Mujahideen were forming their government, Pakistan declared that it will be dualized. 1982. It's almost 3 decades. It is still not even dualized, let alone. So you see, because economic development is not the priority. The priority is strategic, to have control over Afghanistan, to have more Taliban, and to expand militarily. You see, so this is a suicidal policy. Pakistan is so dependent on foreign loans, dependent on IMF, and so many other things. And a number of occasions, Pakistan military leaders have also claimed that they have given up on this policy, but every time it is discovered in practice that they have not.
And when you say this deconstructing the Pashtun and the Afghan identity, so in essence, it is an anti-Pashtun, anti-Afghan project. Now that the Taliban has walked into Kabul and has taken over Afghanistan, did they succeed? Is this the final development of this Taliban project of the Pakistani military establishment? And where do you see the Afghan Pashtun identity going from here?
You see, Taliban could capture Kabul. They could get to Kabul because there was a shift in international politics. I think Americans were not averse to the idea of injecting Taliban into Afghan system because they have problems with China, rising China as economic power. So I think that is how they could enter there. But you see, I don't think they can really rule Afghanistan. You see, it's a military machine, basically. It's not geared, it's not really designed as political party. It's not a political party. I used to say in seminars during last 10, 15 years, I've been saying this, that it is a perpetual IRA without Sinn Féin. People in Europe would probably understand it easily. You see, so they are perpetually fighting. They have the only type of governance that they know is militant governance. You see, this militia sort of behaves like it is a state. In 1990s, they ruled Afghanistan. They captured Kabul in 1996. Up till September 11, they ruled Afghanistan, most of Afghanistan. But you see, there was no constitution.
Yeah.
Even now, there is no, even there's a constitution not even mentioned. So this Malaysia is parliament, this Taliban Malaysia is parliament, it is judiciary, it is executive. There is no police. So these gun-wielding Taliban are state by themselves. So I am confident that Afghan people will rise against them. I'm very, I know Afghanistan a little bit. So I know Afghan history, Afghan politics, Afghan culture. I think Afghans will, they cannot, any people would have resisted against such a militant governance, which does not provide any right, because there is no law, no constitution.
You make a very interesting point. Is you've made that in your articles as well. If I understand correctly, you make a point which in essence means that the US at some point of time has sacrificed Afghanistan in order to counter China and its BRI investments and its expansion. So saying that a stable Afghanistan was working in favor of the Chinese, and an unstable Afghanistan would counter that. So the Americans sacrificed the Afghanistan and the Afghan people in order to counter the Chinese. Is that the point?
That is exactly what I want to say. You see, Mr. Khalilzad, Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad, Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad, in his briefing, I think it was June, when he was briefing the Foreign Relations Committee on the Doha deal, he was asked by senators, congressmen, he was asked as to what was the position taken by China and Russia. Mr. Khalilzad says that China and Russia benefited by the stability that we brought to Afghanistan. They had problems with terrorism emanating from Afghanistan, but when we stabilized Afghanistan, they benefited by it. And his words are, and they were free riders. And they were free riders. You see, so I believe it is the new Cold War. It has come to our place. And the sad thing is that in 1980s, there was political polarization in Europe between NATO and Warsaw Pacts. But you see, the hot war was brought to our region. Once again, there may be tensions in East Asia between Japan and China, the South China Sea countries and China, Australia and China. But you see, again, the hot war is brought here because there are structures with very little money and without shedding their own blood, blood of the soldiers. You see, US is now talking about strikes over horizon. You see these drone strikes. So they will be able to kill without getting killed. So you see, it's a very serious threat to the peace in our region, this new Cold War. And unfortunately, US, particularly after this 2008 recession, I believe US revisited its policy and it decided to sort of mainstream Taliban so that Russia and China and Iran could also get some taste of this instability.
But you make an interesting point. You say the hot war is always brought to our region, but isn't it also true that the hot war is brought to that region because there are actors who actually wait for that war to be brought in the shape of these religious madrasas, the military establishment? These actors are, of course, interested in these wars being brought to their place because that is where they benefit.
Yes. There is history to it. You see, these Anglo-Saxon dominated countries, particularly UK and US for that matter, they have long experience in handling religious politics in their colonies, in the Middle East, in South Asia. You see, this partition of India, what was it? It was, according to Winston Churchill, it was a breakdown plan in which he thought Congress would get south of India, and in the north, British will have its colony continuing with its military bases. This was the original plan of Winston Churchill. They couldn't implement it just like that because of the consequences of the Second World War. But you see, this was the original plan. And you see this Muslim belt starting from Xinjiang, Central Asia, then West Asia, Middle East, then Turkey, then North Africa, this whole region. Now, what it needed was a detonator so that it can be exploded against communism. And you see, I mean, the way they used it against Soviet communism in 1980s, in a way, this strategy was successful. But we thought after 9/11, some of us thought that probably they might have given up on this strategy, but now it seems they have not.
And you mentioned Xinjiang. That was actually one of the questions I wanted to come to. There is, of course, this discourse going on that China is cozying up to the Taliban or is not cozying up to the Taliban. The Chinese have, of course, this, according to them, this issue in Xinjiang where they have put a lot of, actually, according to sources and independent verifiable sources, they have put almost 1 million Muslim Uyghurs in concentration camps. And now you have the Taliban in Afghanistan. So how worried are the Chinese that this could have a spillover effect to Xinjiang?
Before that, I would just want to share with you recently in a lecture here in Islamabad, in a lecture about Afghanistan, I said that 7 countries were very closely in touch with Taliban when they were entering Kabul. There were 7 countries. Pakistan was first and foremost, of course, then US, UK, China, Russia, Iran, and Qatar. These 7 countries. I said, but they all 7 have their own agendas. Their agendas do not converge. But everyone thought that they could use this situation against the other. So in Urdu, there is a term which has come from Persian originally. It say they talk about Gurg Ashti. Gurg Ashti. Gurg is wolf, and Ashti is peace. Peace of the wolf or peace of the wolves. You see, when the wolves get in caves during snowfall in Kashmir, you know, because it's the same as true in Afghanistan. When there is snowfall and there is no food outside, so then they get stuck in a cave and they say, let's live in peace. But then they get hungry. So they look at each other and they pounce at the weakest. They eat it up, and then they again declare we'll live in peace. So I said this is the 7 countries supporting Taliban have similar peace of the wolves, and now we have seen Iran has already jumped out and it has started supporting this resistance in the north. But in any case, coming back to Xinjiang, I think you see China is an authoritarian state. It is one-party state ruled by the Communist Party of China, and it has its system. It is economically very well developed. I have been to China and I've been to Xinjiang also. I've seen Urumqi and some other parts of Xinjiang. It has developed quite a lot. I mean, socioeconomic development, but of course they don't have type of democracy that we sort of are used to in our struggle or in our countries. But you see, those who talk of these rights in Xinjiang, they're not speaking about massive killing by Taliban in Afghanistan these days. I haven't seen much media focus on Taliban. So you see, I'm very strong supporter of human rights, and I really say that maybe in Xinjiang, maybe anywhere else. I mean, people should have rights, individuals, because in this day and age, people should not be slaves. They should not be kept like slaves. They should be given at least fundamental rights, the minimum international standard of rights. But you see, it should not be used for political purposes, sort of pick and choose. In one place, human rights should be supported. In other places, they should not be. If there is a universal standard, it will be more successful. Even for countries like China, they will have to open up, because if it is universal, then of course, who will be able to resist this? So there are problems in China, yes, but the way I mean, I'm really concerned about the beginning of a new jihad. You see, this can turn into a new jihad. You see, these people, Taliban say we wouldn't let Al-Qaeda or Daesh or others to use Afghan soil. This is exactly what they used to say about Osama bin Laden in 1990s. But in 1990s, there were terrorist attacks in 4 continents. 4 continents: Asia, Africa, Europe, and American continent. 4 continent attacks that could be traced back to Afghanistan, Taliban's Afghanistan. So now when they say they wouldn't let them act, so what are these guys doing in Afghanistan? Are they there for some picnic? What are they doing if they are not pursuing their aims and objectives. So now,
jihad.
Yes, jihad. I mean to say, you see, they will pinprick Chinese. If Chinese come out after them, then they will say China has attacked, invaded the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, and jihad is, of course, the only. If Chinese do not, they will have to face this. This. But I'm not saying that it's happening tomorrow, or this is what the Western countries would like to see. Of course, China has good relations with Pakistan Army and Pakistan Army.
Where do you see the Pakistani military establishment in this? Because they are in the middle and they have very good relationships with both of them.
Yes, that is what we are now pointing out, because our leaders, Abdul Ghaffar Khan Badshah Khan, in 1980s, Abdul Wali Khan, they used to say that this is a suicidal policy, don't pursue it. But these guys, Pakistani generals, would say, no, we can do it, and it's delivering. But you see now that we have reached a stage where Pakistani policy is entering into a closed street. There's going to be no way out. You see, Pakistani policy has reached a point where it has to choose, and none of the choices is in the interest of Pakistan. Because if it stands with China, Pakistan is so dependent on Western technology, Western education, Western financial resources, Western liquidities, the type of Pakistan has almost has an addiction of this Western grants, etc. Chinese have cash only in form of loans, which are to be paid back with interest. So this choice is really not easy for Pakistan. So you see, this is the wrong policy. Pakistan should have avoided being a patron of these militant organizations. Pakistan should have opted for economic development, geoeconomics with Afghanistan and Iran, other countries, even China. Pakistan should have engaged these countries in economic development cooperation.
Do you see Pakistan, the military establishment, pursuing another double game, but then now with China, which they did with the US?
They would love to, but I have my doubts that they can really play that, because
so the Chinese would not be willing to play.
You see, both these powers are players with big data. They can see through many things. So it's not playing with Afghanistan or with the Arab Gulf countries or Iran. They're playing with China and US, both of whom have resources to know as to what is happening.
Mm-hmm. So now coming to today's Afghanistan, as you know, there is this around 90%, almost all of the country has been taken over by the Taliban. They, like you said, they don't have a constitution yet. Human rights are, of course, trampled upon. Women still are, again, like in the 90s, treated as second-class citizens. There is a small resistant front building up in, or was there, or is there in Panjshir Valley. Where do you see this going? Which Afghan community, institution, because let's not forget the Taliban are still supported. An insurgent, militant, terrorist organization can, of course, not live for 20 years and fight the mightiest power in this world unless and until they are supported by a state. You have pointed out many times that that state is the Pakistani military establishment. So I assume they will be continued getting support from them. So which movement do you see building up against them?
You see, Pakistani military support will be with them, I'm sure, but that wouldn't be really, that wouldn't be capable of keeping them in the ruling seat because of their unpopularity. You see, first of all, you saw millions of Afghans would like to go out of their country. You see, even today, if the gates are open, I mean, a great majority of Afghans will leave their country because they know they've experienced Taliban's rule in the past. As I said, it's a occupation militia which really has no laws, no constitution, nothing, no state system.
So this will eventually, they will not be able to rule.
They will not be able to, first of all. But let me just do, you asked me what is happening at the moment. You see, at the moment, things are very bad because even among Taliban, even according to Taliban's own standards, the extremist group of Taliban is dominant. It's dominating their present structure or their present grip rule over Afghanistan. You see, there are two narratives at the moment among Taliban leadership. One is the narrative that their victory, they call it victory against the US. As I said, they don't recognize the fact that there may be some international politics and US might have its own interests. But in any case, they say we won the war, we were victorious, because the most important weapon that we use, they say, is suicide bombing. That is the most unique weapon that they claim to have used in this war, which has given them victory. And they say that those who sacrificed their lives in this suicide bombing were the ones who wanted pure Sharia implemented in Afghanistan. So they would like to implement this. It is this view is upheld by Taliban Amir Hebatullah Akhundzada, their leader, supreme leader, and Haqqani network. The two of both these dominant groups, they are dominating. The other group, the other faction, the other narrative is Mullah Biradar and some other people who say that it was the Doha deal which gave us ascendancy, political ascendancy, legitimacy, and we were enabled to sort of expand our political cause because of the Doha deal. So they say we should implement some part of Doha deal, some inclusivity, some space, giving space to others, non-Talibans. But so far, this group is weak, the second narrative, and the first narrative is dominating. And that has really deprived Taliban regime from technocracy and bureaucracy. They say, their senior leaders say that the people who have served in the previous government, in the first four levels, bureaucracy, four top levels of bureaucracy, none of them will be given a role in this new administration. So they're practically depriving themselves of this technocracy and bureaucracy. So they don't have the know-how to govern. They know only thing that they know is the gun, looking to the barrel of the gun.
You also you talk about you in essence you make a distinction between the so-called diplomats of the Taliban, which were the people who were sitting in Doha, and then the hardcore fundamentalist radical group within the Taliban. And then you also mentioned the Haqqani network. How distinct is the Haqqani network and this radical group? Because it seems very strange for people to know is that a person like Sirajuddin Haqqani is on international designated terrorist lists, and today is the interior minister of Afghanistan. So how is this struggle? And then we also knew that during the time that this government was formed, during the time that there was an attack on the Panjshir Valley, and during the time that Haqqanis were being inducted and having this power play, the previous chief of the ISI, Faiz Hamid, was also at that time in Kabul. So how do you connect all this?
You see, Haqqani network is the closest ally of Pakistani military establishment. The elder Haqqani, Sirajuddin Haqqani's father, he came to Pakistan in 1974. far before the Soviet army came to Afghanistan, far before even PDPA's power. It was under Dawood Khan that he revolted and he came to Pakistan, Jalaluddin Haqqani, the Sirajuddin Haqqani's father. So, and they have been living in Pakistan. Most of their brothers, I mean, they have been born here and they've been growing up in Pakistan. So socialized in Pakistan. They have huge interests. They have investments here. They have property, real estate, right in Islamabad, in Rawalpindi, let alone Waziristan and other places where they are based. So they're very closely connected. But you see, in recent years, they have become part of Taliban organization. And it has increased Pakistan's influence in the Taliban structure as a whole. Because traditional Taliban are mostly from Kandahar, at the greater Kandahar as we call it, the southwest of Afghanistan. Most of the Taliban leaders come from that area, the prominent leaders, are military commanders. But Haqqanis, they come from Paktia province, which is southeast of Afghanistan. And they, of course, have had the the bulk of resources for war were given to them, always given to them. And they had the best of relations with Al-Qaeda. So they were sort of a link between Al-Qaeda and Taliban. They were a link between Al-Qaeda and there will be a link between Taliban and Pakistani military, particularly intelligence agencies. So you see, they are a very vital link in this whole connection. So this traditional Taliban leaders from Kandahar, Great Kandahar area, they sort of they are also dependent on Pakistan. I'm not saying that they sort of were in another country, but they made some effort to be recognized beyond being Pakistani protégés or Pakistani puppets. So they sort of were very keen to establish a separate identity. But you see, before in this, when Kabul was being invaded by Taliban, you see the Haqqani network captured Kabul city. Even today, it is administered by Haqqani network. And this is one of the grievances of this Mullah brother faction. They think Kabul as capital should be sort of run or organized or managed by Taliban's main body from Kandahar. You see that is, but you see that it's not for the first time. Even in 1992, when Afghan Mujahideen were coming from Peshawar, Rawalpindi to Kabul for taking over, Ahmad Shah Massoud had some arrangements with some elements of the PDPA, and this Dostum, General Dostum, and part of faction of Babur Karmal, they sort of entered into an alliance and they overthrew Dr. Najibullah's government. And before these Mujahideen or Made in Pakistan government could reach, Massoud and his allies were sort of controlling Kabul. So these Mujahideen were faced with the fait accompli. Similarly, the Taliban, when the Quetta Shura, which came via Kandahar, when they reached Kabul, Kabul was already taken over by Haqqanis. So this was also a fait accompli.
So do you see at some point of time an infighting between the Taliban and the Haqqanis, or will they reconcile with how it is now and with this fait accompli?
You see, the visit of by Pakistani ISI former DG, General Faiz Hamid, was in this connection. Because there was a physical clash between the two factions of Taliban in the President House on these issues, the issues that I mentioned. And you see, had this interference not been there, Mullah Biradar might have become the Prime Minister. You see, this Mullah Hassan who is the present Prime Minister, is very recluse. He is not interfering. You haven't heard his statements. He's not delivered any speech. So the show is run practically by Haqqanis. So this Prime Minister works for them. Mullah brother could have been a different commodity.
So the show is run by the Haqqanis and
yes,
in essence run by Rawalpindi.
Yes, so you see, so that's what will make this government more unpopular.
Yeah,
this regime, the so-called Taliban's government will become more unpopular with the passage of day, more non-inclusive, more exclusive.
But do the Afghans, like they saw the American invasion of Afghanistan as foreign occupation, do they see this running the show, as you call it, by the Haqqanis as foreign occupation?
Yes, I think according to my estimate, majority of Afghans are not happy over it, and the way they are fleeing the country is an indicator. You see, Taliban were capturing city after city militarily, but you didn't see a single public demonstration in their favor. Because I said it was without Sinn Féin, IRA, without Sinn Féin, and you see, they do not have political capital. They don't have political capital. The only capital that they could gain was in Doha, and it was given to them by US and Pakistani patronage. US sort of by giving some space and Pakistani support, they were able to have this. Of course, Russia and China also jumped at the opportunity, because for them to see American forces leaving Afghanistan was a prime target. Physically leaving Afghanistan.
And if we come to that geopolitical situation a bit more, you have also written that Chinese, you actually also said it here, that Chinese investments in Pakistan are actually loans which have to be paid back. I remember reading somewhere that you actually wrote that these are debt traps of the Chinese for the Pakistanis. How do you see these big projects developing with this instability in the region?
No, I think I didn't say that it is a debt trap. What I want to explain is this. You see, Chinese investment in Pakistan, I don't think it's bad for Pakistan, because no one is investing in Pakistani infrastructure. For example, Pakistani power sector. 6 years ago, Pakistan was facing a great shortage of power, but not anymore. We still have problems of distribution system, but generation has reached where it fulfills Pakistan's requirement. Similarly, Pakistan's trade connections, etc. You see, the Western assistance for Pakistan was mostly for military. In the past, Chinese assistance was also in the past for military. But with CPEC, it has come to civilian, particularly infrastructure. But of course, we still have questions about some explanation about certain projects and the priorities that Pakistani ruling circles have adopted towards CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And particularly the way it is dominated by the most populous province, that is the Punjab. Most of it has gone to Punjab. I mean, even a rail network in Lahore city is built from the funds of CPEC, which is supposed to go to Gwadar, Balochistan. And Gwadar doesn't have drinking water.
So it's very unevenly distributed.
Yes.
The profits go to Punjab and the resources are taken from the other provinces.
From the country. And the whole country will have to pay the debts ultimately. You see, Pashtun tribal areas.
We talk about this, you said about loans. and you say that currently these loans of China are in some way benefiting the local population in terms of power and electricity. But two questions: how will the future generations of Pakistan pay these loans back if Pakistan continues on the current trajectory? Second is, are you afraid that things like which happened in Sri Lanka and in places in Africa where these Chinese loans could not be paid back, and then at some point of time these countries had to hand over parts of their sovereignty? Is that a fear you have?
You see, China or no China, Pakistan has to grow out of geostrategic, and Pakistan has to step in geo-economic.
Mm-hmm.
That is the only option left for Pakistan. If Pakistan continues to get bogged down, get stuck in this geostrategic with militarization, is China or American aid or any sort of support will fire back, because it will be used in non-productive sectors, not in education, not in human development. What we need is human development. We need investment in education.
This is, of course, what needs to happen. Do you think it will grow out of this? Do you think it will happen?
You see, it is very difficult to confidently say that it will, because of our history, because of our even current situation where you see, we have a hybrid system. It's controlled by military. They haven't let any prime minister to complete his or her tenure or her constitutional term. They have been sacked or removed or overthrown by military generals in 70s, 80s, 90s. Even now, we are witnessing, I think Imran Khan is on his way out. I can see him leaving the scene because he was used, but he is becoming a liability. He's not anymore an asset, so he will be probably removed. So this is the fact, but it's quite a bleak situation in that sense. Particularly after 2014, we have been experiencing an unannounced martial law. You see, the fundamental freedoms have shrunk. Particularly, media is very strongly controlled. Political parties are manipulated, blackmailed, and this accountability law is used for political engineering, etc., etc. But having said this, I also want to add that I can see a major change in Pakistan for the first time. There is a growing awareness among people of Punjab, from where most of the military comes. People in Punjab are realizing that this will not work. And they have a leader, Mr. Nawaz Sharif. He is the very authentic leader of Punjabi businessmen. Punjab's national bourgeoisie, if you use the Marxist term, national bourgeoisie. And then he is confronting bureaucratic bourgeoisie. You see, the generals are also now a class.
Mm-hmm.
But this Nawaz Sharif's class is the class that he is leading. And now he is in the forefront of struggle against generals. In the past, it would be leaders from the smaller provinces, Abdul Ghaffar Khan, Osbak Bisinjo, and they would be immediately labeled as Indian agents. They will be immediate agents, Afghan agents, etc., etc. But it's very difficult to label Mr. Nawaz Sharif.
Because he was a product of the military.
Product of military, then he is president of Muslim League, Mr. Jinnah's party.
Mm-hmm.
Then he is Punjabi.
Yeah.
Then you see, it's not possible for military to shoot people, kill people in Punjab. They can't do this. The things that they can do, for example, in federally administered tribal area in Pakhtunkhwa province or in Balochistan, they can't do this in Punjab. So there is awareness. Secondly, the social media is also making a difference. You see, they have controlled televisions, they've controlled newspapers, but they have failed so far to control social media, although they have tried and they're still trying. I mean, they abducted people, people were disappeared to teach a lesson, but there are millions of people.
Yeah.
They can't disappear millions. I mean, so there is some hope in this struggle, democratic struggle in Pakistan, that may change, because otherwise, you see, this militarized Pakistan has no future. Unfortunately, that would be sort of this country will be led to implosion. It will lead to destruction, self-destruction, rather than any foreign invasion. You see, it has more internal problems than foreign threats.
Yeah, we slowly we're coming to the end of this interview. There are a few questions I still would like to ask you. One is, of course, you talk about Nawaz Sharif maybe turning out to be the torchbearer of democracy. And do you think it's possible, or should it happen that then all these torchbearers of democracy, whether big or small, like you have the PTM, the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, then you also have the People's Party, then can they do this without joining hands, the military, defeat this military mindset in Pakistan? Can they do it alone?
You see, Pashtun Tahaffuz movement is unique. It can't be compared with the other political parties, because it's a very genuine grassroots movement, very authentic people's movement, and it is a struggle against war, also anti-war, and for human rights of Pashtuns in these areas which are very close to the Demolished line, and which were used for this Afghan war during the last 4 decades. I mean, Pakistani military operations also were focused in this area. So they were attacked by terrorists, and they suffered in military operations. You see, so Pashtun Tahaffuz movement rose from that area, and it broke the fear of criticizing the generals at a time when nobody, even Nawaz Sharif, was not doing it at that time. So they were the first one. But then later on, Mr. Nawaz Sharif also used strong language and very clear criticism of the military's leadership on the basis of their control of the state system and resources, and sort of stopping the democratic process. So there is some, but I agree with you. I mean, no party can do it alone. It has to be a joint effort. So far, the military has been able to divide them. You see, they sort of they have baits of offering powers to one party at the expense of the other, and they have been doing it. They're quite expert in this because political engineering has been one of their pet projects also internally. That's so. But I see some in recent days. I mean, even this week, I've seen growing unity, particularly among the two major parties, that is Nawaz Sharif's Pakistan Muslim League and Pakistan People's Party, led by Bilal Bhutto Zardari, the son of Benazir Bhutto. In Parliament, they have started cooperating. You see, today, as we are talking, I don't know when will this interview be broadcasted, but tomorrow there was supposed to be a joint session convened by the ruling party led by Mr. Imran Khan. But since yesterday, his parliamentary party was defeated twice in one day in the National Assembly, twice on legislation. So today, first Imran Khan, earlier in the day, he addressed his parliamentarians, his party's parliamentary party, and asked them to go to the joint session tomorrow, like taking part in jihad. These were his words today. But after a few hours, this tomorrow's session is cancelled. because they're not confident that they will be able to have majority in the assembly. It shows some strength of the opposition parties getting closer, closing their ranks.
That has happened earlier as well, and then, you know, of course, one needs to be hopeful. It has happened earlier as well, and then of course, Mohtarma Benazir Bhutto was attacked and killed, and then it didn't went as planned. So these things.
Yes, she was a great leader. I knew her. I had the honor of knowing her and working with her for some time in opposition. I met her a few days before her death. I remember when she was freed after Musharraf had kept her in detention in one of her colleagues' house in Lahore. Asma Jahangir and I went to see her, and we had a prolonged discussion with her. When we were leaving, she told me, she said, "Mr. Khattak, isn't it very sad that we are discussing the same problems that you used to discuss 15 years ago?" Because these problems are unresolved.
Yeah, of course.
I said, yes, it is very sad. But let's hope, I said, the new generation, the younger generation probably will do better than us. So you see, she was really a very inspirational leader, but unfortunately, she was killed by terrorists.
No, I had the honor of meeting her as well in London. And this brings me to my next question. Mr. Khattak, forgive me for asking this question. It might be a bit, I don't want to be in any way disrespectful, but how is it that a person like you, who criticizes and who speaks the truth and who speaks truth to power, in a very dangerous place like Pakistan, where people have been disappeared, kidnapped, killed, interrogated, jailed for far less, how is it that you are still alive?
Yes, that's a good question. That's a good question, and very, very logical in view of things happening in our country. You see, I also faced threats. I have been in prison for more than 5 years. I have faced physical torture in a very difficult ways. In 1970s, even at very young age, I had to be hospitalized because in prison I was in very bad shape. And not just that, in recent years, in 2008, just before elections, I survived a suicide attack. A suicide bomber entered into a public meeting which I was supposed to address after a little while. It was in Charsada, a district where my party's president, Asfandyar Wali Khan, was contesting elections. I was campaigning for him, and he was advised by the government that there was a threat to him. So I went to that place and I addressed the meeting, and the suicide bomber entered and he tried to reach me. He was stopped a few meters away from me and he exploded himself. And it was a terrible experience. 29 people died in this explosion around me. And my right ear, you see, after a little while, it stopped hearing. And I could see people killed and injured. And so apart from it, there were other incidents. The incident in which at the time that we were going to meet Akbar Bukti, our car was fired upon.
Yeah, you said that.
We spent the night. And even recently, very recently, one TTP leader who was very notorious, Mr. Ehsanullah Ehsan, who was supposed to have surrendered to military in 2017 and remained 3 years with military. And then he's supposed again to have escaped. So from wherever he is, he said that he was given a list of people, a state kill list.
Okay.
And my name was a part of that list. Most of them were PTM leaders. but also people like Mr. Farhatullah Babar, People's Party leader, outspoken leader, democratic, consistent, determined democrat. So these lists have been there, and National Assembly's Committee for Human Rights is still inquiring into this list. And I have appeared in the National Assembly's committee for this investigation, this kill list. Even UN 5 rapporteurs, special rapporteurs, UN rapporteurs of Human Rights Council wrote a letter to Pakistani government in probably in 2019. Yes, it talked of a state kill list of 18 people, in which 3 were female women activists and 15 were male activists. So we have these things, but you see, in this age, now I've crossed 70, I remember our leader, Abdul Wali Khan, a very outstanding leader. He was a freedom fighter against Britishers, and then he was a Democrat fighting for democracy in Pakistan, federal democratic system. He used to say he had similar problems. He used to laugh when you used to tell him that you should be careful. He used to say, but the average age in our country is 60 years. I have crossed 70, so I am living in bonus. So that's how we console ourselves.
Yeah.
So let's hope, I mean, as long as we are alive, I think I think we should stand for truth. That is our human duty.
No, that's a very admirable and courageous, I would say, stand you have to stand. Like you say, it's your human duty. It's your human duty.
Yes, and I had to go live in exile for 8.5 years because, again, under Ziaul martial law, I had a similar threat to my life, and that's what made me live in exile for 8.5 years. And both of my children were born in Afghanistan.
And I'm, like you have said, you are confident that the Afghan people will also stand for the truth and consider this as their human duty to stand against.
They definitely will. I remember in 1980s, President Najibullah used to say that they have a glorious history fighting for freedom, but they have a difficult geography. Afghanistan has a difficult geography, and this difficult geography has attracted, but Afghans are survivors. They are very resilient people. They have survived right from Alexander the Great to Genghis Khan, to Babur, and to many others. And the recent powers, we have seen Soviet forces invading Afghanistan, American forces. Pakistan has been very busy in. But the Afghans are really survivors. I'm sure they will assert themselves and they will remain independent in their own country.
I think that's the best line to end this interview on. A very hopeful line from you. Afrasiab Khattak Saab, thank you very much for talking to us. And we hope that this will not be a one-off, and then soon in the future we can have you again on anything which is relevant to the region. You have a vast knowledge on Afghanistan and on Pakistan, and there are so many issues which we haven't discussed and which I hope we can do the next time, which is of course the issue of the drug trade in the region. The menace that has not only swept Afghanistan but also Iran, and in recent days also Kashmir, the drug and the heroin trade. Another point which we would like to discuss with you again the next time is, of course, you mentioned it, relations of Pakistan with India, that peace, in essence, peace with India will also benefit Pakistan and help in the democratization of the society and institutional over there. So that's another topic. There are so many topics there, and I hope you can talk to us another time on these topics. Then we can learn from that as well.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Good night.